collective moan from the students, because their experience in groups had always been they were the ones that did all the work, and the rest of the group got the grade that these people did the work for. As I put them in groups and they started to operate all being from that level, then the fight was, no, I'm used to running the group. I want my ideas to be supreme. And so then it became kind of a battle in figuring out how these groups would work best together. Let me just go through some lessons that I learned. And I actually, as I got going on this, I started kind of an independent study myself and read a number of articles about how groups should work and so forth in a school setting. And so I just have a set of lessons here that I want to share with you. So lesson 1 is to make groups worthwhile. Group work must be meaningful. And preparing for this competition, obviously it was meaningful. This would determine whether or not they go to Washington or not. It also put a little peer pressure on them to step up to the level that they should work at to be in this group. Now, when I was doing it, there was a little monetary incentive because the center provided some of the money for the trip to D.C. With the country being $20 trillion in debt or whatever we are today. They've pulled back a little bit of that money, but still there's a monetary incentive to that. So the group work was very meaningful. And then also I could use group scores in the various competitions and practices and so forth that we use to help determine grades. Lesson 2 on this is that the groups have to be together long enough to get through the stages of cohesion. The idea of forming, storming, norming, and performing has been used to describe how groups have to work together. Many of our groups in a school situation, they just get through the first stage and then they're broken up. And so these groups would last 6 to 8 months, and so it did offer them a chance to fight with each other for a while and decide what their roles would be, and then so forth and so on. After creating groups, I would require them to meet at least one time a week outside of class. And this is something, again, one of these things you couldn't ask a normal class to do, but because of the competition, they were willing to do that. And I also suggested that their first meeting be something totally non-academic, like going bowling or playing basketball or going on a walk together. In order to kind of break up the preconceived stratification of the kids within the group. So if you're the best bowler in the group, but you're not the best researcher, that gives you at least something that you're good at in the group. Lesson 3, the participants need to be part of the selection process. Now, this is a little bit delicate in a closed group like a class where there's only 33 people. What I finally hit upon, this took me a few years, was to stress the topic first and then who you work with second. So I had them fill out, and this was after about 3 weeks of just doing some basic lessons and talking about how the class would work and so forth. So they got to know me, they got to know their classmates a little bit if they didn't know them. But I'd give them an index card and I'd have them rank the first 2 topics out of the 6 units that they would be most interested in working on. Then they listed 2 people that they would like to work with and 1 that they would not want to work with. So that gave them a buy-in that they were helping make that decision. Then I took the cards in the back office and I sorted through them and I created the groups. And it usually worked pretty well. There was that one year where everybody put the same kid down as the one they didn't want to work with. And we, worked through that with a number of private conversations. But generally they came into the groups wanting to be in the group and at least having one person that they could work with, that they were, friends with. Lesson number 4 is that everyone in the group needs a task and a title. And this really speeds things up, I found, rather than just putting together and let them do the socialization process where finally a leader emerges. I would say on day 1, you want to designate who the group leader is, who the chief researcher is, who the treat provider is, who the editor is, and so forth. They actually came up with much better titles than that they used. Just a couple of other overflows on this. The competition gets everyone, including the teacher, on the same team and working for a common goal. And it made my teaching much easier because now the teaching and my research, I learned a ton of stuff as I did this, and I was motivated to go to conferences. And by the way, the center puts on a great summer workshop every year. The one I went to was at Pepperdine, which is a beautiful campus. I've only been there that one time, but we were there for a week, and it was paid for, I think there were 6 or 8 of us from Utah, and it was all paid for at that time. I'm not sure what the financial situation is now. Just a couple of ideas that I would use, and one was when we talked about the philosophy of government, and there's so much written, and let me just show you. Here's the questions, a set of the questions that are sent. This is in 2005, so not too out of date. But let me read one of them. How did the arguments of the Federalists and Anti-Federalists reflect their points of view regarding natural rights, republicanism, and constitutionalism? And then the sub-questions on balance, do you think the Federalists or Anti-Federalists presented the better case, and why? And which of the arguments presented by the Federalists and Anti-Federalists are still relevant? And why do you think those arguments persist in our society? That's a deep question. That could almost be a year-long study for these kids, and it would turn out to almost be that. As you get into the current issues of federalism and state control versus federal control, there's about 10 issues that are running through my head right now. The Bears Ears issue, who controls taxation and so forth and so on. And they could research all of that stuff and get into some good depth. But one little trick I used early on was to assign them, instead of assigning specific things, I gave them a reading list of all these philosophers. So Montesquieu and Rousseau and Madison, a couple of his Federalist papers, Plato, Aristotle. So I had, I think, 20 or 25 books and or authors that they could read, and their requirement was to read 50 pages. And I tried to guide them into what the more relevant pages would be. Then we came back, and because the class was so big, I did what I call an inside-outside discussion group. So we set up 10 chairs in the middle, or 15, I guess, and then 15 chairs on the outside if we had 30 in the class. And the outside kids were forbidden to speak, which really was hard for many of them. And the inside kids were the discussion group. And so we would bring up an issue like, what is justice? And then they would say, well, Plato says this. Well, Montesquieu says this. Well, Hobbes is arguing this. And they would get this conversation going. And 90 minutes of class was never enough time. Then the next day I would switch the groups and have the inside be the outside. But a great way to bring a lot of information together and show them how much stuff was out there and zero in on one of the aspects that we were supposed to be studying. Just one final thing, and I'll be quiet here. Two final things. Use the practice rounds to gain favor with your administration. So as you get these guys ready for the competition and whatever level you want to play with, have the parents come, have an evening, get some treats, and make sure the principal or vice principal or whoever is there. And in fact, you can invite the principal to come and be one of the judges. They'll like that. And then bring in, a school board member, the mayor, somebody kind of politically involved as a judge. Give them the questions, kind of give them the parameters of how it should work, and have the kids go through their paces. Every time I did that, the parents almost have tears in their eyes about what their kids are learning. The administrators are just so impressed by what's happening in your class, and so they will continue to support what's going on. And one other story then is my chief rival during this 15 years, and we won about 7 or 8 times, and Margaret O'Bray from Mountain Crest, she would win on the off years, so we just went back and forth. Margaret was really taken with this program as well, to the point that she felt like she couldn't teach it unless she lived it. So she ran for city council and won, and that opened up all sorts of avenues for her as well. I didn't quite get that far off the beaten path, but she served as city council. She was also pulled into Logan to USU to help teach the teacher ed stuff because of her involvement in this and what was going on in her classroom and in her community. So that's enough of an introduction. We are always ready to help and guide you in anything you need to do. If you need judges or more hints on how to do this, just let me or Don Hauser, who is the state representative, know.